Alright, so today I want to talk about overtraining and how you can tell if what you're doing in the gym isn't working because you're too stressed. I'll see you inside. So by far one of the most common questions when it comes to exercise is how many rest days a week should I take? And by God, I wish I could answer this question accurately and tell everyone exactly how many rest days they actually needed. I just can't. Recovery is so complex and there's a myriad of factors outside of just the stress of training that's going to affect your recovery. Stress is stress, whether it's work stress, family stress, relationship stress, mental stress, training stress. It's stress, that's all it is. And not only will recovery demands vary between individuals, it will vary within you across your lifespan and probably across the month. Some weeks you may need one rest day, some weeks you may need three, and sometimes you might need to take an entire week off of training because you're simply too stressed. Not only does stress affect your recovery, but so do the actual implementations that you use for recovery, including sleep and nutrition. It's not just the quantity of sleep and nutrition that you get, but it's the quality too. As you can tell, it would be way out of my scope of practice to tell anyone how many rest days they needed, and if someone told you that they could, they're probably trying to sell you something. So, when asked that question, I defer the question to the fixations of autoregulation. So whenever I'm asked this question, I actually just defer to instead educating the individual about autoregulation so they can make the decision themselves. Autoregulation is simply just a tool for you to attempt to determine the optimal ratio of work days to rest days, given all the nuances of your life. And there are a few great ways to try and determine whether or not you are overtraining, or whether or not you need more or less rest days. And now, in the case of a weight loss diet, it becomes much more difficult to determine sufficient recovery because you cannot rely on performance parameters to demonstrate you are properly recovering and progressing. For example, oftentimes we would rely on something like the weights progressing in the gym, but if you're losing body weight, it's very likely that your lifts in the gym may actually begin to decrease. In addition, technically losing weight is a state of subpar recovery because you're not giving your body sufficient energy. So if you're extremely overweight, you would not notice this, but if you're at very low levels of body fat, you may actually begin to notice this. With that being said, you can use fitness wearables that track heart rate, sleep parameters, and heart rate variability to determine your overall rest and recovery. So if we take the context of losing weight, it's very likely that we're becoming more cardiovascularly fit. Therefore, our heart rate will typically decrease as we get healthier and lose excess body fat because we are increasing our cardiovascular fitness. And now this doesn't just apply to weight loss clients, but anyone should actually be tracking their heart rate. And if their heart rate begins to go up instead of down, it's probably a sign that we're overstressed. The best metric to look at is resting heart rate and your heart rate during exercise to know if your heart rate is elevated. And if heart rate metrics on your chosen fitness wearable are telling you that your heart rate has suddenly begun to increase either at rest or during your workout, it is very likely you may be in a state of insufficient recovery. We can also use the variability in your heart rate, called heart rate variability, as the inverse of heart rate. What I mean by this is in terms of what you would be looking out for. Heart rate variability should begin to increase as we get healthier, but in a state of high stress and under recovery, heart rate variability will begin to lower. To make it simple, in a state of high stress, your heart is going to be more rigid and less flexible, lowering the variability of your heart rate. So if your heart rate variability metrics begin to decline or decrease, it is a strong indicator you need either more recovery, less stress, or a mixture of both. And now moving on to the final metric I like to look at is sleep. In a state of high stress, sleep may not be as deep and restorative. If you have too much stress and not enough recovery, you may begin to get less deep sleep or overall sleep even though you're spending the same time in bed. So you may still be spending 8 hours in bed, but your deep sleep may have gone from 1 hour to 10 minutes. With that being said, if you are practically falling asleep every time you sit on the toilet, this may also be indicative that you have accumulated too much stress and you are beyond tired. The final metric would be simply how difficult it is for you to wake up in the morning. If you feel less energetic than usual, or if you require more stimulants to get to the same level of energy, then stress accumulation is likely becoming too great for you to fully recover from. In all of these scenarios, the first step I would typically take is to try and address the stress that is causing the insufficient recovery. What I mean by this is trying to remove as many stressors outside of training as possible. And if you have mitigated stress as much as you reasonably can, but are still experiencing symptoms that align with improper recovery, then the next step would be to implement more rest days. If this strategy does not help with recovery, you may want to consider taking a period of time either completely off of the gym or in a phase of training called a deload phase, in which you just reduce the volume and intensity of your workouts so they do not impose as much of a recovery demand. You can then monitor all the metrics we mentioned and see if they begin to improve, or simply just go by how energetic you feel. I would always still include the quantitative metrics like heart rate, sleep, and heart rate variability because it can be used to assure that you are not overlooking the state of under recovery that may be deleterious in the future. As you can tell, when someone comes to me asking how many rest days per week they should be taking and is expecting a number in my response, I simply just do not know because there are so many inter-individual variations and factors that alter your recovery. And to think, we haven't even spoken about the different types of training, different types of experience levels with training, and the different intensities of training. But that's a story for another episode. I hope you come back and join me next episode. Thank you for listening.